Walter Cross was 42 years old, and to everyone who passed him in the hallway at Jefferson High School, he was just the janitor. His wife, Angela, saw the same thing. A man with calloused hands, a used F-150, and a $40,000 salary she'd grown too embarrassed to mention at dinner parties. So, when a millionaire developer named Brendan Fossey came along with a downtown condo and a proposal, she made her decision. She sat Walter down, delivered a rehearsed speech about needing more, and walked out of 9 years of marriage without looking back. She felt no guilt. How could she? She was simply trading up. What Angela never knew, what she couldn't have imagined, was that the man she'd just discarded as dead weight owned $5.7 million in real estate across the city? And the millionaire she'd chosen to replace him? He'd been desperately trying to buy Walter's land for 18 months. She dumped her janitor husband for a millionaire. She had no idea her janitor was richer than them both. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The mophead kissed the floor in long, slow arcs. Back and forth, back and forth. A rhythm older than thought. Walter Cross moved through the east corridor of Jefferson High School the way water moves through a creek bed. Patient, steady, finding every low spot without being told where they were. The industrial buffer hummed under his hands, a low vibration that traveled up through his wrists and settled somewhere behind his sternum like a second heartbeat. The linoleum shone wet and gray under the fluorescent lights. Nobody would see it like this. By 7:15, 300 pairs of sneakers would scuff it dull again. That was fine. He wasn't polishing the floor for an audience. It was 5:47 in the morning. The hallway was empty. The building was empty. Just Walter and the hum and the smell of lemon concentrate and the faint tick of the heating system waking up in the walls. He liked this hour, liked the weight of a building before it filled with people, liked the way sound traveled differently through hollow space, the echo of his boot soles, the distant click of a thermostat, a door settling on its hinges 2 hallways over. Most people moved through buildings without hearing them. Walter heard everything. He paused the buffer near the trophy case outside the front office and crouched to examine a scuff mark near the baseboard. Black rubber. Basketball shoes. Someone had pivoted hard here, probably cutting the corner on the way to the gym. He pulled a rag from his back pocket and worked the mark out with 3 firm passes. Gone. He stood, pressed his palms into the small of his back, and stretched. 42 years old. 6'1". Built like a man who had carried things his whole life. Not gym-built, but work-built. The kind of frame that came from loading drywall and pulling fence posts and spending weekends under crawl spaces. His hands were wide and slightly calloused, the nails trimmed short and clean. He wore dark Carhartt work pants, a gray thermal Henley under a canvas jacket, and steel-toe boots that he resold every 14 months at a cobbler on Vine Street because they fit right, and he didn't believe in throwing away what still worked. He had been a custodian at Jefferson High for 11 years, not because he had to be, but that was a fact he kept folded up and put away in a drawer that nobody else had a key to. By 6:30, he had finished the east corridor and moved to the gymnasium. The door hinge on the south entrance was grinding again. He'd flagged it twice in the maintenance log, and twice the district contractor had quoted a price that made him shake his head. He pulled a flathead screwdriver and a small tube of white lithium grease from his belt, removed the hinge pin, cleaned the barrel, packed it with grease, and reseated it. 30 seconds. The door swung silent. He wrote nothing in the log. He didn't need credit. He needed the door to work. At 6:45, Principal Deanna Okafor walked past the gym on her way to her office, coffee in one hand, a stack of budget printouts in the other. She paused. "Walter, did you fix that hinge?" "Yes, ma'am." The district was going to charge us $400 for that. Yes, ma'am. She studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. She had a habit of doing this, looking at Walter a beat longer than his job title suggested she should, like she was reading something written in small print. You know, when the facilities committee sends me those contractor bids, I always end up wishing I could just ask you what it should actually cost. Walter allowed himself a small smile. You can always ask. I know I can. She tapped the budget printouts against her thigh. That's what worries me. She walked on. Walter watched her go, then turned back to his cart. He liked Deanna Okafor. She was sharp and tired in the way that good principals always were, stretched between budgets and children, and a district office that understood neither. She listened more than she talked, which was rare in administrators, and she had never once, in 11 years, made him feel like the help. That mattered to Walter. Not because he needed validation, because he noticed who gave it and who didn't. And that information told him almost everything he needed to know about a person. The Ford F-150 sat in the far corner of the staff parking lot, nosed against the chain-link fence that separated Jefferson High from the lot behind the Dollar General. It was a 2014 model, dark blue, with 188,000 miles on the odometer, and a bench seat that Walter had recovered himself with gray canvas when the original fabric split. The truck ran clean. He changed the oil every 4,000 miles, rotated the tires on schedule, and kept the bed lined and organized with a toolbox bolted to the left rail. He climbed in at 3:17 p.m. after his shift. The engine caught on the first turn. He pulled out of the lot and turned west on Caldwell Road, past the strip mall with the nail salon and the check into cash, past the Baptist church with the marquee that read, "God's timing is perfect, even when yours isn't," past the elementary school where kids were streaming out into a line of minivans and SUVs. The drive home took 11 minutes. The house was a 3-bedroom bungalow on a quiet street lined with crepe myrtles that hadn't bloomed yet. Walter and Angela had bought it 7 years ago. Her money on the down payment, his steady income qualifying the mortgage, a split arrangement she had mentioned exactly once at a dinner party, and that he had never mentioned at all. The porch was swept. The gutters were clean. A clay pot near the front door held a fern that Walter watered every other day, and Angela had stopped noticing 2 years ago. He unlocked the front door and stepped inside. The house smelled like coffee that had been sitting on the warmer too long, and a candle, vanilla and sandalwood, that Angela burned in the living room. The living room itself was neat and carefully arranged. Angela's taste. Modern lines, neutral tones, everything placed with the kind of precision that said, "Someone is watching." On the wall above the couch hung their wedding photo. Walter in a charcoal suit, Angela in ivory, both of them smiling in a way that looked, even now, like they had meant it, and they had. That was the part that made it hard to look at sometimes. Not that it was fake, that it had been real. On the back of the couch lay his grandmother's quilt, hand-stitched, blue and cream and rust-colored squares, each one cut from a piece of clothing that had belonged to someone in the Cross family. His grandmother had given it to him the year before she died, and he had carried it through 3 apartments and 2 states before it landed here. Angela had tried twice to move it to the bedroom closet. Walter had put it back both times without discussion. It was still here. Angela was in the kitchen, pouring coffee into a travel mug. She wore a fitted blazer, dark slacks, her hair pressed straight and pulled back. Gold studs in her ears, light makeup, precise. She looked like a woman on her way to convince someone of something, which, in fairness, was her job. Pharmaceutical sales. She was good at it. She had a voice that made you feel like she was letting you in on something, even when she was reading off a spec sheet. She glanced at Walter as he set his keys on the hook by the door. "Hey, I'm heading out early tomorrow. Conference in Charlotte, remember? I told you last week." "I remember. I left the hotel confirmation on the counter if you need to reach me." "All right." She crossed the kitchen and kissed him on the cheek. Her lips pressed against his skin for exactly 1 second. The kind of kiss you gave a coat rack on your way past it. Automatic, dutiful, already thinking about the next thing. Walter felt it. He had been feeling it for months. Not a single moment. Not a dramatic change. More like the slow retreat of water from a shoreline. You don't notice the tide going out until you look up and the sand is dry for 100 yards. He watched her gather her bag, check her phone, and pause at the door to smile at him. "I'll be back Sunday night. There's leftover pasta in the fridge. Drive safe." She left. The door clicked shut. The house was quiet in the way that only a house missing a person could be. Not silent, but hollowed, like someone had scooped out the middle of every room and left only the edges. Walter stood in the kitchen for a moment. He poured himself a glass of water. He drank it slowly. He rinsed the glass and set it upside down on the drying rack. Then he saw the paper on the counter. Not the hotel confirmation. That was there too, pinned under a magnet shaped like a seashell from a vacation they'd taken to Gulf Shores 4 years ago. This was behind it. A single sheet, folded once. He recognized the format, the joint credit card statement. They had one shared card, used mostly for groceries and household expenses. Angela usually reviewed it on her laptop and shredded the paper copy. This one she had missed. Walter picked it up, unfolded it. His eyes moved down the column of charges. Grocery store, gas station, Target. A restaurant he didn't recognize. Luca's, downtown, $187. That was high for a solo meal, but Angela entertained clients sometimes. He kept moving. Then he stopped. Halfway down the page, a charge dated 3 weeks ago. The Ivy Hotel, Charlotte, NC, $412 room charge. 2 guests, 3 weeks ago. Walter had been home that weekend. He had mowed the lawn on Saturday, replaced the flapper valve in the hallway toilet, and grilled chicken thighs for dinner that Angela never came home to eat. She had said she was at a regional training. One night. She'd come back Sunday afternoon, tired and cheerful, with a bag from a boutique he'd never heard of. 2 guests. He read the line again. The kitchen was quiet. The fridge hummed. The fern on the porch needed water tomorrow. Walter sat down at the kitchen table. He placed the statement flat in front of him. He read it once more, carefully, the way he read everything, slowly, completely, missing nothing. Then he folded the paper along its original crease, carried it back to the counter, and placed it exactly where he had found it, behind the hotel confirmation, under the seashell magnet. He said nothing. The alarm went off at 4:45 a.m., same as always. Walter reached over and silenced it on the first tone. He lay still for 3 seconds, then swung his legs off the bed and sat on the edge of the mattress in the dark. The other side of the bed was empty. Angela was already in Charlotte, or wherever she actually was. He showered, dressed, Carhartt pants, gray work polo, steel-toed boots he'd resoled twice. He made coffee in the kitchen, standing in the same spot where he'd read the statement 12 hours ago. The seashell magnet hadn't moved. The paper was still behind it. He didn't look at it. He drank his coffee. He rinsed the mug. He drove to Jefferson High. At 5:51 a.m., he was pushing the buffer down the south corridor on the 2nd floor, the machine humming its low, familiar drone. 2 fluorescent lights above the science wing were flickering again. He made a mental note to replace the ballasts before Friday. No one looking at Walter Cross that morning would have seen anything different. His face carried the same patient, unhurried expression it always did. He nodded to the early bird math teacher who arrived at 6:15 with a box of Krispy Kreme for her first period kids. He propped open the gymnasium door for the JV basketball coach hauling a bag of balls from the equipment closet. He ate his lunch, turkey sandwich, apple, thermos of water, on the bench outside the maintenance office at 11:30, same as every day. He told no one. He showed nothing. But the thinking had already started. Walter was not a man who reacted. He was a man who processed, and what he was processing now was not the heat of anger, though the anger was there, deep and slow, like coals banked under ash, but the shape of the thing, the dimensions of it, how far back it went, how wide it reached, what it meant. One hotel charge could be explained. He knew that. People made mistakes. Systems doubled entries. There were innocent reasons a room might list 2 guests. But the kiss on his cheek, the months of quiet withdrawal, the conferences that came more frequently this year than any year before, the way she looked at his hands sometimes, like they belonged to someone she hadn't agreed to. Those weren't system errors. The next evening, after his shift, Walter sat in his truck in the driveway with the engine off. Angela was still in Charlotte. The house was dark. He held his phone in both hands, the screen casting blue-white light across his face. 6 months ago, Angela had gotten a new phone. She'd been frustrated with the setup process, and Walter, who had a quiet competence with technology that she rarely acknowledged, had helped her transfer everything over. During that process, he had connected her photo library to their shared cloud backup. It was the same system they'd used for years to store family pictures, vacation photos, tax documents. Angela had a habit of forgetting what was connected to what. She changed passwords often, but never thought about the architecture underneath. Walter opened the Cloud app, tapped into the shared folder, then into the subfolder labeled with Angela's device name. The photos loaded in a grid, hundreds of small squares. He started scrolling. The first thing he noticed was the restaurant, Luca's, the same name from the credit card statement, a low-lit table, 2 glasses of red wine, a candle between them, Angela's hand on the white tablecloth, her nails freshly done, a thin gold bracelet he didn't recognize on her wrist. The photo was taken from across the table, meaning someone else had taken it. He kept scrolling. A weekend trip. A hotel balcony overlooking water. Not Charlotte. This looked coastal. Wilmington, maybe. The timestamp said late March. Walter had been at a district training seminar that weekend. Angela had said she was visiting her college roommate in Raleigh. More photos. A man's arm around her shoulder in a booth at a place with exposed brick walls. A selfie in a car, her laughing, turned toward the driver's seat, her hand on someone's forearm. A dinner plate photographed from above, tagged with a location pin Walter didn't recognize. A candid shot of Angela in a white sundress on a boardwalk, taken by someone who clearly thought she was beautiful. The inside jokes showed up in the captions. He tried to order for me again. Our spot. 3rd time this month. We have a problem. 8 months of photographs. At minimum. The earliest image with the man in it was dated the previous October. Angela and Walter had hosted Thanksgiving dinner that November. She had held his hand during the blessing. Walter did not scroll fast. He moved through each image slowly, the way he read everything, completely, missing nothing. His face did not change. His breathing did not quicken. But his jaw tightened by a single degree, and his thumb pressed harder against the glass with each new frame. Then he found the one that gave him the name. It was a photo of Angela standing in front of a building, a construction site, steel framing visible behind a temporary fence. She was smiling, holding a hard hat like a prop. Behind her, bolted to the fence, was a large sign. Fosse Development Group, Luxury Living. Coming 2025. A Brendan Fosse project. Walter knew the name, not personally. From the news, Brendan Fosse had been profiled in the Tribune twice in the past year, a developer building condos in neighborhoods that were transitioning, which was the word the paper used when it meant black families were being replaced by coffee shops and yoga studios. Walter had read both articles. He remembered the man's face, square jaw, expensive haircut, teeth that were too white and too even to have come in that way on their own. The kind of man who stood in front of his own buildings for photographs because he wanted you to understand the scale of what he'd built. Walter also recognized the construction site in the photo. It was on Delancey Avenue, 3 miles from this house, in a neighborhood Walter knew very, very well. He closed the app, locked his phone, set it face down on his thigh. The truck cab was dark. The street light at the end of the block threw a pale yellow cone across the hood. A dog barked somewhere on the next street over. 2 quick barks, and then silence. Walter sat for 4 minutes without moving. Then he picked up his phone and called Israel Washington. The line rang 3 times. "Walt!" Israel's voice came through warm but alert. It was after 8 on a weeknight. Walter didn't call after 8 on weeknights. "Everything good? I need you to find out everything about a developer named Brendan Fossey." A pause. Not long. The kind of pause that happened when a man who had known you for 20 years heard something in your voice that wasn't usually there. Not panic, not grief. Something flatter than both. Something with edges. Israel did not ask why. He did not ask what happened. He did not ask if Angela was involved, though years later he would tell Walter that he had known, right then, in that 3-second pause, exactly what this was about. "I'll have a file by Friday," Israel said. "Thank you, Walt." "Yeah. Whatever this is, take your time." Walter ended the call. He sat in the truck for another minute, watching the dark front of his house. The fern on the porch was a shadow against the brick. The porch light was off. Angela usually turned it on when she left, so he'd have light coming home. She hadn't bothered this time. He went inside. Angela came back Sunday night, as promised. She walked in at 7:40 p.m., carrying her overnight bag and a small shopping bag from a store Walter didn't recognize. Different from the last one, but the same kind of store. Places that sold things in tissue paper. She set her bags down in the hallway. She looked tired but composed. She had changed somewhere before coming home. Her outfit was different from the one in the last photo he'd seen in the cloud. A selfie time-stamped Saturday evening. Her in a black dress, earrings he'd never bought her, smiling at the camera with the easy warmth of a woman who was exactly where she wanted to be. Now she stood in the hallway of the house she shared with her husband and tugged at the hem of her blouse like she was adjusting to a slightly smaller space. "Hey," she said. "Hey, how was Charlotte?" "Long. Productive, though." She moved past him into the kitchen and opened the fridge. "Did you eat?" "I did." She pulled out a bottle of water and leaned against the counter. She didn't drink it right away. She held it and looked at Walter. Really looked at him, for the first time in what felt like weeks. But it wasn't the look of a woman seeing her husband. It was the look of a woman gathering herself, rehearsing. "Can we sit down for a minute?" she said. "Sure." They moved to the living room. Angela sat on the edge of the armchair, not the couch, not next to him. She placed the water bottle on the side table and folded her hands in her lap. Her rings caught the lamplight. The wedding band. The small diamond he'd saved 7 months to buy. Back when 7 months of saving meant something different than it did now. "I've been thinking a lot," she began, "about us, about where we are." Walter sat on the couch. His grandmother's quilt was behind him. He said nothing. "I'm not happy, Walter. I haven't been for a while." She paused, and the pause had the quality of something practiced, not fake, exactly, but shaped, smoothed at the edges. "I don't think it's anyone's fault. I just think we've grown into different people." He watched her face. She held his gaze for a moment, then looked down at her hands. "I think we should talk to someone. Pastor Atkins. I think she'd be good for this. She knows us both, and I trust her, to be fair." "Fair about what?" Angela's eyes came back up. "About what we want, what we need. I just think I need some space to figure out what that looks like for me." She tilted her head slightly, the way she did when she was offering something she wanted you to accept without examining too closely. "Does that make sense?" It made perfect sense. Every word of it. Not because it was true, but because Walter understood exactly what she was building. A narrative with a soft entrance and a prepared exit. A story where she was brave, and he was the landscape she'd outgrown. She wasn't asking for counseling. She was staging a departure with a witness. He thought about the photos, the wine glasses, the captions. Our spot. He thought about 8 months of weeknight calls she took in the other room, and Saturday mornings she left before he woke up, and the slow, deliberate way she had stopped touching him. Not all at once, but inch by inch, like pulling a thread out of a seam so carefully the fabric didn't know it was coming apart. He thought about Brendan Fossey's name on a construction fence. None of this reached his face. "That makes sense," Walter said. "I'll call Pastor Atkins this week." Angela blinked. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not relief, exactly. More like the brief confusion of a person who had braced for resistance and met none. She had expected questions, maybe argument, maybe the kind of desperate emotional appeal that would confirm she was the reasonable one. Walter gave her nothing. "Okay," she said. "Good. Thank you for hearing me." "Of course." She picked up her water bottle and stood. She paused for a moment, standing over him, and Walter could see her trying to read him the way she always tried to read him in moments like this, looking for the crack, the tremor, the evidence that something was happening underneath. She found what she always found, a quiet man, sitting still, giving nothing away. "I'm going to take a shower," she said. "All right." She left the room. Walter heard the bedroom door close, then the bathroom door, then the water. He sat on the couch for a long time. The quilt pressed against his back. The house settled around him in small creaks and ticks, the sounds a building makes when it's holding more weight than anyone realizes. That night, Walter lay in bed on his back. Angela was beside him, asleep, turned toward the wall. The ceiling fan moved in slow circles above them, pushing air that didn't need pushing. His hands were folded on his chest. His eyes were open. He was not in anguish. The grief was there, real, heavy, lodged somewhere behind his sternum like a stone he'd swallowed whole, but it was not running him. It sat inside him the way everything sat inside Walter Cross, acknowledged, weighed, and placed where it belonged so he could think clearly about what came next. Angela wanted Pastor Atkins. Fine. That meeting would happen, or it wouldn't. It didn't matter. What mattered was what Israel would bring him by Friday. The photos told him the who and the how long. Israel's file would tell him the rest, the shape of Brendan Fossey's business, where his money came from and where it went, what he was building and what he needed to build it. Every man with that much ambition and that much visibility had a structure underneath him, and every structure had a load-bearing wall. Walter intended to find it. He lay still. The fan turned. Angela breathed beside him in the slow rhythm of a woman sleeping easily, unbothered by anything she'd said or left unsaid. Walter stared at the ceiling and thought about property lines. He thought about Delaware holding companies and LLC filings and the 11 parcels in the Riverside district that no one, not Angela, not Brendan Fossey, not anyone in his life except Israel Washington, knew he owned. He thought about the fact that Brendan Fossey's construction sign had been 3 miles from this house, in a neighborhood that bordered a district Walter had been quietly acquiring for 6 years. He did not yet know what that meant, but he knew it meant something. The ceiling fan turned. The room was dark. His hands rested on his chest, one folded over the other, perfectly still. Walter Cross was not a man who rushed. He was a man who planned. And right now, lying in the bed he shared with a woman who had already left him in every way that mattered, the plan was beginning to take shape, not in broad strokes, but in the careful, patient way he did everything. One piece at a time, one question at a time, one answer leading to the next. The stone behind his sternum didn't move. It didn't need to. It would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and for a long time after that. But so would he. The file arrived at 5:22 a.m. on Thursday. Israel sent it as an encrypted attachment with a one-word subject line. Here. Walter sat in his F-150 in the Jefferson High parking lot. The engine was off. The cab smelled like coffee from the thermos wedged between his thigh and the center console. Through the windshield, the school was dark except for the security lights along the east wing, their glow flat and orange against the brick. He opened the file on his phone. Israel had been thorough. He was always thorough. But this was something else. This was the work of a man who understood that the person asking needed every number right and every detail sourced. Brendan Foss, age 47, Fosse Development Group, LLC, founded 11 years ago. Principal office downtown, 14th floor, glass and steel, leased not owned. Personal assets, $2.1 million split between a condo in the Meridian Building, a vacation property in Hilton Head, 2 vehicles, and liquid accounts at Wells Fargo and a regional brokerage. Healthy on paper, impressive at dinner parties. Walter scrolled down. The business side told a different story. Fosse Development carried $6.8 million in outstanding obligations, construction loans on 3 active projects, a line of credit secured against future revenue from developments not yet completed, vendor contracts with escalation clauses tied to project milestones he was behind on. The whole thing was stacked like a house of cards in a room where someone had left the window open, still standing. But one gust from a very bad afternoon. Walter took a slow sip of coffee. He kept reading, and then he found it. Buried on page 9, under a section Israel had labeled Active Acquisition Targets, was a subsection with its own header in bold. Riverside District, Priority 1, 11 properties, residential and mixed-use parcels along a 6-block stretch of the Riverside neighborhood. Brendan Foss had been pursuing them for 18 months through 7 different brokers. He had made written offers 4 times. He had sent an attorney inquiry that Israel, Walter's own attorney, had received, read, and let sit unanswered for 4 months before sending a 2-sentence declination on Crossroads Property Group letterhead. Brendan Foss had no idea who owned those properties. The LLC was registered through a Delaware holding company. The holding company listed Israel's firm as its registered agent. There was no public trail back to Walter Cross. There was no trail at all. Walter stared at the parcel list. He knew every address. He had walked every sidewalk. He had replaced the roof on 414 Riverside himself, spent 2 weekends on a ladder in August heat because the contractor's quote was honest, but Walter wanted to see the joists with his own eyes. Those 11 properties were the keystone of Brendan Fosse's entire expansion plan. Without them, his flagship development had no sight. Without the flagship, his lenders had no confidence. Without his lenders' confidence, the whole structure, the $6.8 million structure, started to lean. Walter closed the file. He looked through the windshield at the dark school. He did not move for a long time. That evening, Angela came home at 7:15. Walter heard her keys in the door. He was sitting at the kitchen table, same chair as always. He'd made himself dinner. Baked chicken, rice, green beans. Her plate was in the fridge, covered in foil. He didn't know yet if she'd want it. He'd made it anyway, because that was what you did after 9 years. The muscle memory of love outlasts the love itself. She walked in and stopped in the kitchen doorway. She was wearing a coat he hadn't seen before. Camel-colored, expensive. She hadn't bought it with their shared account. Walter. Angela. She didn't sit. She stood in the doorway with her purse still on her shoulder, and he could see it in her posture. The careful straightness of her spine, the slight lift of her chin. She had come here to deliver something, and she intended to deliver it standing up. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," she said. Walter set down his fork. "And I know, that what I need is more than what we have, more than what we've become." She swallowed. Her eyes were steady, but her left hand gripped the purse strap tight enough to turn her knuckles pale. "I want a divorce." The kitchen was very quiet. "There's someone else," she continued. "His name is Brendan. He's a good man, Walt. He's asked me to marry him. And I've said yes." She paused. The pause was supposed to give him room. Room to react, room to crumble, room to ask why in the broken voice of a man who didn't see it coming. Walter looked at her. He thought about the file in his truck. 14 months. Miami. A relationship that had been running since before last Christmas. Since before she gave him that watch she said she'd found on sale. Since before the anniversary dinner, where she'd held his hand across the table and told him she was grateful. "How long?" he said. 8 months. The lie landed between them like a coin on a countertop. Small, flat, unmistakable. Walter nodded. He pushed his chair back. He stood up, walked to the cabinet, took down a glass, and filled it from the tap. The water ran cold and clear. He drank half of it. Then he set the glass on the counter and turned to face her. "All right, Angela. You'll get what you need." She stared at him. Her lips parted slightly. She had prepared for something. Tears, anger. The kind of desperate bargaining that would let her walk away feeling like the strong one. She had rehearsed responses to his pain. She had not rehearsed this. That's it," she said. "What else would you like me to say?" She searched his face. She looked at his hands, still, resting at his sides. She looked at his eyes, brown, steady, revealing absolutely nothing. For a moment, something shifted behind her expression. Not guilt, exactly. Something closer to unease. The feeling you get when you push against a door you expected to be locked, and it swings wide open into a dark room. "I just thought—" "You thought I'd beg." She flinched. Not at the words, at the tone. Calm. Even. The same voice he used to tell her the dishwasher needed a new gasket. The same voice he used for everything. "I don't beg, Angela. You know that." She stood there for another 5 seconds. Then she adjusted the purse on her shoulder, nodded once, and said, "I'll come get my things this weekend. Take what you need." She left. He heard her footsteps in the hallway, then the bedroom, then the closet. He heard hangers sliding, a suitcase zipper. 45 minutes of a woman packing 9 years into rolling luggage. When the front door closed, Walter stood at the kitchen window and watched her taillights pull out of the driveway and turn left onto Beaumont Street. The brake lights flared once at the stop sign. Then she was gone. He picked up his phone. Israel answered on the second ring. "She's done," Walter said. "Start the separation paperwork." A pause. Then Israel's voice, low and careful. "You all right?" "I'm standing." "That's enough for tonight." "And Walter turned away from the window. "Don't show her anything yet. Not the portfolio, not the LLC, nothing. She sees exactly what she expects to see." "Understood. One more thing. That acquisition inquiry Fosse's attorney sent you. The one you sat on. I remember. Draft a response. Not a rejection. A meeting. Tell him Crossroads Property Group is open to discussions. In person." The silence on the other end lasted 3 full seconds. Walter could hear Israel processing, not the instruction, but the implication. The full weight of what Walter was doing. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure. I'll have it sent by morning." Walter hung up. He stood alone in the kitchen. Angela's plate was still in the fridge, still covered in foil. The house was quiet, in the way only an emptied house can be. Not peaceful, but cleared, like a field after a storm has passed through and taken the weaker trees with it. He walked to the living room. He sat on the couch, his grandmother's quilt pressed against his back. He opened his laptop. The Crossroads Property Group portal loaded in 3 seconds. He navigated to the portfolio dashboard and clicked on the Riverside District tab. The parcel map filled the screen. 11 parcels shaded in blue, laid out along 6 blocks like the vertebrae of a spine. His spine. His grandfather's land had been the first. Walter had added the rest, one by one, over 6 years, in transactions so quiet they never made the paper. He looked at the map. He looked at the addresses he'd walked 100 times. He looked at the assessed values, the rental income columns, the appreciation projections Israel updated every quarter. Then he looked at the name in the acquisition log, Fosse Development Group, inquiry pending. 18 months of offers, 7 brokers, 4 written bids, all of them rejected by a man Brendan Fosse had never met and couldn't find. Angela had left a janitor for a millionaire. She had no idea that her janitor was the man standing between her millionaire and everything he needed. Walter's mouth moved, slowly, just at the corners. Not a grin, not triumph. Something quieter than that. Something patient and precise and absolutely certain. He smiled. Monday morning, 5:47. The hallway stretched out dark and empty, and Walter Cross pushed the buffer across the linoleum the same way he had pushed it 1,000 mornings before. Left to right. Slow arc. The machine hummed. The floor shone. Nothing about him was different. He fixed a broken hinge on the gymnasium door at 9:15. Coach Patterson stood behind him with his arms crossed, talking about the varsity basketball schedule, and Walter listened and nodded and drove the screws flush without looking up. The door swung smooth when he was done. Coach clapped him on the shoulder and said, "You're the only one who fixes things right the first time around here." Walter thanked him and moved on to the second-floor restroom where a faucet handle had been loose since Friday. At lunch, he sat in the custodial break room with Ray and Marcus, the 2 other janitors on the day shift. Ray was talking about his daughter's wedding costs. Marcus was eating a sandwich the size of a cinder block. Walter ate leftover rice from a plastic container and laughed when Marcus told a story about his brother-in-law trying to install a ceiling fan with a YouTube tutorial and a prayer. Nobody looked at Walter and saw anything different. That was the point. That had always been the point. He pulled into his mother's driveway at 4:12. The house was small and white with green shutters and a porch that sagged slightly on the left side. He had offered to fix that sag 4 times. Dottie told him it gave the house character. She opened the screen door before he knocked. She always did. "Come in here," she said. Not a greeting, an instruction. The kitchen smelled like onions and garlic and something slow-cooked that had been on the stove since noon. Dottie Cross stood 5'3" in house slippers, her reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, a wooden spoon in her left hand like a scepter. She pointed at the table. Walter sat. She put a bowl in front of him. Smothered chicken, white rice, collard greens. The greens had vinegar in them. He could smell it. His grandmother's recipe, passed to his mother, passed through decades of kitchens that never had enough counter space. Dottie sat across from him. She did not eat. She folded her hands and watched him. "Angela's gone," Walter said. "I know." He looked up. "How?" "Because you're here on a Monday eating my food, with that look on your face." She tilted her head. "And because I've had eyes for 2 years, Walter. I just kept my mouth shut because you're a grown man, and I raised you to make your own decisions, even the ones that hurt." Walter put his fork down. He pressed his palms flat on the table. The wood was warm from the afternoon sun coming through the window above the sink. He stared at his hands. "I loved her, Mama." "I know you did." "Not the idea of her. Her. The woman I ate breakfast with. The woman who used to fall asleep reading on the couch with her feet in my lap." His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. "That was real. At least it was real to me." Dottie reached across the table and placed her hand over his. Her fingers were thin and strong. She held on and said nothing for a while. The stove ticked behind her. A car passed on the street outside. Grieve it, she said quietly. Don't skip that part. Don't be so busy planning that you forget to feel what happened to you. She broke a promise. That costs something. Let it cost something. Walter nodded. His eyes were dry, but his chest was tight. And for a moment, the kitchen blurred just slightly at the edges. Not tears, but the weight of it pressing behind his face, like a held breath. He picked up the fork. He ate. Dottie watched him eat the way only a mother can, measuring something invisible, deciding he was going to be all right. When the bowl was half empty, she said, "Now, tell me the rest." Walter told her. About Brendan Fossey, about the Riverside District, about the 11 properties sitting in his LLC that Brendan had been chasing for 18 months through 7 different brokers. About the fact that the man who proposed to Angela with a ring that probably cost more than Walter's truck was the same man whose entire business strategy depended on land that Walter owned and had no intention of selling. Dottie's spoon, which she had picked up to stir her tea, stopped moving. She set it down on the saucer, slowly, the way you set something down when you need both hands free to hold the size of what you just heard. She was quiet for a long time. Then she looked at her son, looked at him the way she had looked at him his whole life, with a knowing that went past words, and said, "Baby, God didn't do that by accident." Walter nodded. He picked up his fork and finished his food. Israel Washington's law office sat on the 3rd floor of a brick building on Whitfield Avenue, above a dentist and a tax preparer. The hallway smelled like old carpet and coffee. The door said, "Washington and Associates" in gold letters that Israel had paid for himself 12 years ago. There were no associates. There was Israel, a paralegal named Dawn, who worked Tuesday through Thursday, and a filing system so precise it bordered on religious. Walter arrived at 8:15 Tuesday morning. Israel was already inside. The conference table, a scarred walnut rectangle that Israel had bought at an estate sale, was covered in files, printouts, and a laptop open to a county property records database. Israel closed the door, locked it, sat down. He was a tall man with a shaved head and wire-framed glasses that he wore low on his nose, not because he needed to, but because it made opposing counsel nervous when he looked over them. He wore a blue dress shirt with the sleeves rolled to the forearm. No tie. He didn't bother with ties unless someone was paying him to. "All right," Israel said. He opened the first file and turned it so Walter could see. "Here's your boy." Walter pulled his chair in and looked. The top page was a business credit summary for Fossey Development Group, LLC. Israel had highlighted the relevant numbers in yellow. Walter read them one by one. Total outstanding business debt, $6.8 million personal assets, $2.1 million, the downtown condo, a vacation property in Hilton Head, 2 vehicles, and a brokerage account that had been slowly shrinking for 14 months. "The debt breaks down like this," Israel said, tapping a second sheet. 3 active construction projects. The Meridian Lofts on Polk Street, 70% complete, over budget by $400,000. The Sycamore Row townhomes on the east side, framed but stalled because a subcontractor walked off over unpaid invoices. And then his flagship. Israel leaned back. The Riverside project, which doesn't exist yet, because he can't break ground on land he doesn't own. Walter studied the page. The numbers were clean, but the story they told was not. Brendan Fossey was building on borrowed time with borrowed money, and the clock on every loan was ticking toward the same wall. His lender is Atlantic Capital Trust, Israel continued, commercial real estate arm. They've extended him twice already on the Sycamore Row loan. The Meridian Lofts are performing, barely, but the margins are thin, and the completion date keeps sliding. If Riverside doesn't materialize in the next fiscal year, Atlantic Capital starts asking hard questions, the kind of questions where the next meeting isn't with a loan officer. It's with a restructuring team." Walter said nothing. He turned to the next page. A timeline. Israel had built it himself. 18 months of acquisition attempts on the Riverside district, laid out in chronological order. 7 brokers, 7 different approaches. 2 formal offers. 1 informal letter from a real estate attorney Walter had never heard of. 1 attempt to trace the LLC through Delaware corporate filings that hit a dead end because Israel had built the holding company specifically to be untraceable. Every single inquiry had been declined or ignored. Every one of them by Israel, on Walter's standing instruction. "He doesn't know who you are," Israel said. "He doesn't know what Crossroads is. He just knows someone keeps saying no, and he can't figure out why." Walter turned to the last page, his own portfolio. Israel had it independently appraised 2 weeks ago, a favor from a firm in Raleigh that owed him one. 22 properties across 4 districts. Current market value, $4.1 million. Projected value factoring in the Riverside District's development corridor, recent transit authority plans, and 2 unsolicited acquisition offers on parcels in the Delmore Heights area. $5.7 million. Liquid reserves from 6 years of rental income, $800,000. Walter looked at the number. Then he looked at Brendan's number. Then he closed the folder. The room was quiet. Israel watched him the way he always watched him, without rushing, without filling silence with noise. "Send a response to his latest inquiry," Walter said. "Tell him Crossroads Property Group's principal is open to an in-person discussion about the Riverside District." In person? At his office? Israel picked up a pen. Wrote it down. "I'll draft it this morning." "Good." Israel sent the message at 9:40. By 11:50, Brendan Fosse's office had confirmed. Israel called Walter from his desk. They bit. His assistant sounded like Christmas came early. "When do you want it?" "Thursday." "Thursday," Israel repeated. He wrote it down. Then he paused, pen still touching the paper. "Anything else?" Walter was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was even and unhurried, the way it always was when he had already thought something all the way through. "Tell him to have Angela there." Israel looked at him over the wire frames of his glasses. He held Walter's gaze for 3 full seconds. "That's a lot of exposure," he said. "She should see it," Walter said. "She deserves to see exactly what she chose." Angela Cross had never lived above the 8th floor of anything. Brendan's condo sat on the 14th floor of the Stafford Tower downtown, a glass and steel building that had gone up 3 years ago on a block that used to be a bus depot. The unit had floor-to-ceiling windows that faced west, so every evening the sunset poured across the hardwood floors like something from a magazine. The kitchen had an island made of white marble. The shower had 2 heads. The closet was the size of Walter's bedroom. She told herself she had earned this, not the condo specifically. She wasn't delusional. She knew it was Brendan's. But the life, the trajectory, the feeling of waking up in a place that matched the picture she had always carried in her head of what her life was supposed to look like. She had carried that picture for a long time, longer than the marriage. On Wednesday evening, she met her 3 closest friends for drinks at a wine bar on Commerce Street, a place with exposed brick and small plates that cost $14 each. Lisa, Monique, Tanya. They had been her circle since her late 20s, and they had watched the Walter years with the polite, careful silence of women who didn't want to say what they were thinking. Now, they didn't have to be careful. "I just got to a point," Angela said, holding her glass by the stem the way she'd seen someone do in a commercial once and never stopped doing, "where I had to ask myself, is this it? Like, is this the life I'm going to accept? Because nobody was going to rescue me from that decision. I had to rescue myself." Lisa nodded. "You did the hard thing." "The hard thing," Angela repeated. She liked that. She had been collecting phrases like that for weeks. "Choosing myself. honoring my worth, outgrowing someone you love. They fit together like tiles in a bathroom she was renovating, each one clean and smooth and covering whatever was underneath. Walter is a good man, she added, because she always added that. It was part of the speech. The speech needed a line that proved she wasn't cruel, that she had left with grace, that the departure was about her growth and not his failure. He really is. He's kind. He's steady. He's just— She tilted her head slightly, searching for the word she had already chosen. Not ambitious. And I can't be with someone who doesn't want more. Monique sipped her wine. You gave it 9 years, girl. Nobody can say you didn't try. Nobody could. That was the beauty of the story. Angela had shaped it with the same precision she brought to a pharmaceutical sales pitch. Every objection anticipated, every hesitation addressed, every exit ramp blocked. The story was airtight. The story was kind. The story made her the hero of her own courage. She believed it completely. That night, back at the condo, Brendan cooked. He did this sometimes: salmon on a cedar plank, asparagus with lemon, a bottle of Sancerre that cost more than Walter's weekly groceries. He cooked the way he did everything, with confidence, with presentation, with the quiet assumption that someone was watching and impressed. Angela sat at the island on a leather bar stool with her legs crossed, scrolling her phone. The sunset was doing its thing across the floor. My ex would have just microwaved something, she said, not looking up. She said it lightly, the way you mention weather. Sweet man, just not, not driven. He's a school janitor, honestly. Brendan glanced up from the cutting board. That was it. He didn't ask which school. He didn't ask the man's last name. He processed the word janitor the way he processed most information about people who couldn't help him. He let it slide off without friction. Walter Cross was a category, not a person. A man who mopped floors. A man Angela had correctly outgrown. There was nothing in that sentence that required Brendan Fossey's attention. He plated the salmon, set it in front of her. So, he said, sitting across from her with his own plate. That property deal I told you about, the one in Riverside. Angela looked up. The one that's been dragging? 18 months. He picked up his fork. I got a meeting Thursday. The owner's coming to the table. First time they've agreed to sit down. He chewed slowly, his jaw working with satisfaction. If this closes, Angie, this changes everything. For both of us. Angela raised her glass. To Thursday. Brendan touched his glass to hers. The crystal rang once, clear and bright. Neither of them said Walter Cross's name. Angela smiled at Brendan across the dinner table, the sunset sliding golden across her face, completely at ease. A woman who had chosen her future with absolute certainty, sitting inside a life she was sure she deserved. Thursday was 2 days away. The living room was half empty now. Angela had taken the floor lamp, the side table, and both decorative pillows from the couch. She had not taken the wedding photo from the wall, or the quilt his grandmother had stitched by hand 40 years ago. Those things had no value in the life she was building. They only had value here. Walter sat on the couch, with his elbows on his knees. The coffee table in front of him was covered in paper. Israel sat across from him in the armchair. The one Angela had always hated because it didn't match anything, with a yellow legal pad on his knee and a pen behind his ear. He had arrived at 7 with a leather briefcase and 2 bottles of water. It was now 9:15. Walk me through it again, Walter said. Israel leaned forward. He was wearing reading glasses and a polo shirt. His voice was calm, but his eyes were sharp, the eyes of a man who had been building toward this for longer than either of them had said out loud. You walk in, you shake his hand, you sit down. You say nothing that matters for the first 30 minutes. Israel tapped the legal pad. Let him talk. Let him do the whole presentation, the vision boards, the projected returns, whatever nonsense PowerPoint his team put together. let him sell. The more he sells, the more committed he is. And the more committed he is when the turn happens, the harder it hits. Walter nodded slowly. He'll assume you're a passive investor. Probably inherited the land. Probably doesn't know what it's really worth. Israel pointed at him. That's what he wants to believe. So let him believe it. Don't correct him. Don't impress him. Don't even ask smart questions for the first 20 minutes. Just listen. I can listen, Walter said. I know you can. Israel almost smiled. That's your whole advantage. You've been listening for 20 years, and nobody noticed. Walter looked at the papers on the coffee table, county records, appraisal documents, the Crossroads Property Group portfolio, 22 properties, 4 districts, 6 years of patient acquisition, and in the center of it all, the Riverside District parcel map. 11 parcels. His name underneath every single one. Israel reached into his briefcase and pulled out 2 manila folders. He set them side by side on the table. Folder 1. He tapped the left one. Full Crossroads portfolio. Every property, every current valuation, every parcel in Riverside with your name on the underlying deed. This one goes across the table after his pitch. This is the one that tells him who he's been chasing. He tapped the right folder. Folder 2. Comparative financial statement. His net worth next to yours. Independent appraisal of your portfolio at $5.7 million. Factoring in the Riverside Development Corridor and 2 unsolicited offers on your Northgate properties. He paused. This one is for her. Walter looked at the second folder for a long time, but said nothing. Israel pulled the pen from behind his ear and set it down. Now, I need to say something, and I need you to hear me as your lawyer and as your friend. He waited until Walter's eyes met his. Having Angela in that room changes the risk. If it's just Brendan, it's a business meeting. Clean, controlled. He finds out who owns the land, he takes the rejection, and we walk out with the upper hand. But the moment Angela is sitting in that chair and she sees you walk in, it's personal, for everyone. And personal is where things get unpredictable. Walter didn't look away. She needs to be there is. I know you feel that way. It's not a feeling. Walter's voice was quiet but certain, the way a foundation is quiet underneath a house. She sat across from me at that kitchen table and told me she needed more. She told me Brendan could give her the life she always wanted. She looked at my hands and she saw a janitor. He paused. She should be in that room when she finds out what her janitor built. Israel studied him. He had known Walter Cross since they were 20 years old in a lecture hall at LSU. 2 black kids from small towns who recognized something in each other, a patience that other people mistook for lack of ambition. He had watched Walter buy his first property, his 5th, his 15th. He had watched Angela slowly drain the light from his friend's face over 9 years without ever raising her voice. He had kept his mouth shut because Walter asked him to. He wasn't keeping his mouth shut anymore. All right, Israel said. She'll be there. Brendan already likes having her in meetings. She won't need an invitation. He picked up both folders and squared their edges against the table. You wearing a suit? No. Didn't think so. I'm not dressing for Brendan Fossey. Israel nodded. He put the folders back on the table, gathered his legal pad and briefcase, and stood. At the door he turned. Get some sleep, Walt. Tomorrow's a big day. Walter walked him out. Then he came back to the living room and picked up both folders. He held them for a moment, one in each hand, feeling their weight. Everything he had built in silence. Everything Angela never thought to look for. All of it in 2 manila folders, light as air. He set them on the small table by the front door, right next to his truck keys. He turned off the living room light. Then the kitchen light. Then the hall light. The house was quiet, half empty and quiet. Walter Cross lay down in the bed he used to share with his wife, pulled his grandmother's quilt up to his chest, closed his eyes, and slept, deeply, completely, without dreaming. For the first time since Angela left. The Ford F-150 looked wrong in the parking garage. Walter pulled into a visitor space on the second level between a black Mercedes and a white BMW SUV, and the truck sat there like a work boot on a jewelry counter. The engine ticked as it cooled. Walter checked himself in the rearview mirror, clean button-down, dark slacks, his everyday watch. No tie, no jacket. His face was calm. His hands were steady. He picked up the 2 manila folders from the passenger seat, tucked them under his arm, and stepped out. The lobby was all glass and polished stone. A waterfall feature ran down one wall into a basin filled with smooth gray rocks. The directory listed Fosse Development Group on the 14th floor. The security guard behind the front desk glanced at Walter, glanced at his truck through the window, and glanced back. "Can I help you?" "Meeting on 14, Walter said. "Crossroads Property Group." The guard checked his screen and nodded. "Elevators on your left." Israel was standing by the elevator bank in a charcoal suit and a blue tie, briefcase at his side, looking exactly like the attorney he was. He fell in beside Walter without a word. They stood together and waited. The elevator chimed. Inside, the doors closed. The number 14 glowed. Israel looked at him. "How you feeling?" "Like it's Thursday," Walter said. Israel exhaled through his nose, something between a laugh and a prayer. The elevator rose. The doors opened onto a reception area that smelled like new leather and fresh flowers. A young woman behind a curved desk smiled at them. "Crossroads Property Group." "That's us," Israel said. She led them down a wide hallway. The carpet was thick and silent. The walls held framed renderings of finished developments, glass buildings rising out of neighborhoods Walter recognized, the old houses and corner stores erased completely, replaced with words like luxury and modern living. He looked at each one as they passed. The conference room was at the end of the hall, floor-to-ceiling windows, a long table made of dark wood, polished to a mirror shine. The city stretched out 14 stories below. Rooftops, cranes, the river in the distance catching afternoon light. Brendan Fosse stood at the head of the table. He was tall, tan. His shirt was the kind of white that only stayed that white when someone else washed it. His sleeves were rolled to the forearms, carefully, evenly, and a silver watch caught the light when he moved. He had the posture of a man who entered every room expecting it to rearrange itself around him. "Israel," Brendan said, stepping forward with his hand extended. His smile was wide and practiced. "Good to finally meet the man behind all those emails." "Likewise," Israel said. The handshake was firm and professional. Then Brendan turned to Walter. His eyes moved fast. The button-down, the slacks, the absence of a briefcase, the absence of anything that signaled what he expected to see. Something shifted behind his face. Not confusion, adjustment. The kind of quick, automatic sorting a man does when the person in front of him doesn't match the picture he already built in his head. "And you must be?" "Walter Cross, principal at Crossroads Property Group." Brendan extended his hand. The grip was loose, brief, his fingers barely closed. It was the handshake you give someone you've already decided doesn't matter. Not rude enough to name, but Walter felt it in the pressure that wasn't there. He said nothing. He let go. A slight movement along the side wall pulled his vision to the right. Angela sat in a low chair near the window, legs crossed, phone in her hand, a tablet on the small table beside her. She was wearing a cream-colored blouse and gold earrings Walter had never seen before. Her hair was different. She looked expensive. She looked up from her screen. Her thumb stopped moving first. Then her face went still. Not shock, something slower than shock. Recognition arriving in layers, each one worse than the last. Her lips parted. No sound came out. Walter looked at her. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3. He turned back to Brendan and pulled out a chair. "I appreciate the meeting," he said, sitting down. He set both folders flat on the table in front of him, one on top of the other. "I understand you've had your eye on the Riverside district for some time. I'd like to hear your vision." Brendan blinked. Once, then recovered with the speed of a man who sold things for a living. He buttoned his smile back into place, adjusted his cuffs, and clicked a remote. A projector hummed to life. The first slide read, "Riverside Commons, a Foss Development Group vision." "Absolutely," Brendan said. "Let me show you what we've been building toward." He talked for 26 minutes. He talked about mixed-use corridors and projected returns per unit. He talked about demographic shifts and market timing. He talked about luxury finishes and walkability scores and what he called aspirational living. Each slide was cleaner than the last. Each number was rounder. He never once mentioned the people who already lived there. Walter listened to every word. His hands rested on the table. His face gave nothing. Angela had not looked at her phone since he sat down. When the last slide faded and the projector went quiet, Brendan set down the remote and leaned forward with the satisfied ease of a man who had just finished his best pitch. "So," he said, "that's the vision. I think you'll agree the numbers speak for themselves." Walter looked at him. The room was very still. "Before we discuss terms," Walter said, "let me show you something." He nodded to Israel. Israel reached across the table and slid the first folder to Brendan. It was plain manila. No logo, no label. Just a folder, the kind you buy in a 10-pack at any office supply store. It stopped in front of Brendan with the quiet sound of paper on polished wood. "This is the complete portfolio for Crossroads Property Group," Israel said. "Every property, every parcel, every underlying deed." Brendan looked at the folder like it was a formality. He was still riding the high of his own presentation, still leaning forward, still wearing the smile. He opened it casually, the way a man opens a menu at a restaurant he's been to before. The smile died on the second page. Walter watched it happen, watched Brendan's eyes move left to right, then stop, then move again, then stop longer. His fingers pressed the edge of the page too hard, leaving a small crease. He flipped to the third page, the fourth. His jaw tightened. The muscles along the side of his neck pulled taut like cables. Every deed, every parcel number, every one of the 11 Riverside District properties listed under Crossroads Property Group, and every single one tracing back to the same name on the underlying ownership documents, Walter Cross. Brendan looked up. "You're the owner?" "All 11 parcels," Walter said. 6 years. Brendan's mouth opened, then closed. He looked down at the file again, as if the pages might have changed. They hadn't. He looked at Israel. Israel's face was stone. A sound came from the side of the room. It wasn't a word. It was something that lived underneath words. A sharp, involuntary breath. The kind a person makes when they've been struck in a place they didn't know was exposed. Angela had pressed her fingers against her mouth. Her eyes were wide and wet, and locked on the folder like she could read it from 10 feet away. Walter did not look at her. Not yet. Israel reached into his briefcase and produced the second folder. This one he opened himself, turning it so the pages faced Brendan, and set it beside the first. "This is a certified independent appraisal conducted last month," Israel said. "Full portfolio valuation, including projected appreciation on the Riverside parcels, liquid reserves from 6 years of rental income, and 2 recent unsolicited acquisition offers on properties in other districts." He tapped the number at the bottom of the summary page. $5.7 million. Brendan stared at it. His hand had gone flat on the table, fingers spread, like a man trying to keep his balance on solid ground. Walter let the silence hold for 3 full seconds. Then he spoke. "Your acquisition offers have been declined 18 times through 7 different brokers, over the last 18 months, Walter said. His voice was level, unhurried. The same voice he used when he explained a broken pipe to the school principal or talked through a lease agreement with Israel over coffee. I want to explain why, directly, so there's no confusion going forward. Brendan said nothing. Your development model depends on displacement, Walter said. Every one of your renderings, every slide you just showed me, starts with the removal of the people who already live there. Long-term residents, families, small businesses that have been in those buildings for decades. He paused. Not one of your 18 offers included a preservation clause. Not one included a community benefit agreement. Not one even mentioned the existing tenants by name. He let that sit. I didn't need your money, Mr. Fossey. I never needed your money. I was waiting for a developer who understood that land isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. Someone who saw the people on it. Walter's hands stayed flat and still on the table. You are not that developer. I think you knew that, which is why you tried 7 different brokers instead of asking the question yourself. Brendan's jaw worked. No words came. Walter closed his folder. He squared its edges with his fingertips. Then, and only then, he turned to Angela. She was frozen. Her hand was still pressed against her lips. Her eyes were red at the edges and bright with something that had no name yet. Not shame exactly, not regret exactly, but the first terrible understanding that the story she had built around herself was built on nothing. Walter looked at her the way you look at a house you once lived in that belongs to someone else now. I hope it was worth it, he said. Her hand dropped from her mouth. Her lips moved. Walter, He raised one hand. Not fast. Not angry. Just raised it, palm forward. The way you close a book you've already finished reading. That conversation is already over. He stood. Israel stood beside him. Walter buttoned his top button and looked at Brendan one final time. Thank you for your time, Mr. Fossey. Brendan did not stand. He did not speak. He sat with both folders open in front of him like a man reading his own autopsy. Walter and Israel walked out of the conference room, down the thick, silent carpet, past the framed renderings of erased neighborhoods, past the receptionist and her fresh flowers. The elevator doors opened. They stepped inside. The doors closed. Neither of them spoke. The floors counted down. 14, 13, 12. The hum of the cables was the only sound. Israel stood with his briefcase at his side, his jaw tight, his eyes fixed on the descending numbers. The lobby arrived. The doors slid open. Israel exhaled. Long, slow, the full weight of 2 decades of silence leaving his chest in a single breath. He shook his head once. 20 years, he said quietly. 20 years I've been waiting for that. Walter straightened his collar. He looked at the glass doors ahead, where the afternoon light poured through in long, bright sheets across the polished stone floor. He walked out into it. Angela called Friday morning. Walter's phone lit up on the kitchen counter while he ate toast over the sink. He looked at her name on the screen. He set the phone face down and finished his breakfast. She called again at noon. He was replacing a fluorescent bulb in the second-floor hallway at Jefferson High. He felt the buzz in his pocket. He finished the bulb, climbed down the ladder, and kept walking. She called a third time at 4:15. He was in his truck in the school parking lot, engine idling, windows down. He watched her name glow and fade. He drove home. Brendan moved faster. Saturday morning, Israel's inbox held a revised acquisition proposal, drafted in obvious haste, full of language that sounded right but meant nothing. A community consideration addendum, a promise to explore preservation-compatible design options. No binding clause, no dollar figure attached, no timeline, just words arranged to look like conscience. Israel read it once. He typed a single line. Crossroads Property Group is no longer accepting acquisition inquiries for the Riverside District. He hit send and closed his laptop. By Monday, the story was moving. Not because Walter told anyone. Brendan told the wrong person. A business associate he was trying to reassure over drinks, spinning the meeting as a negotiation hiccup. That associate mentioned it to a broker. The broker mentioned it to another developer. By Wednesday, the development community in the city understood three things. The Riverside district was locked up, the owner had no interest in selling, and Brendan Fossey had been turned down flat to his face. Thursday morning, Brendan's primary lender called to schedule an emergency portfolio review. Friday, 2 of his 3 construction partners requested updated financial disclosures. The walls didn't fall all at once. They just started leaning. Angela came to the school on a Tuesday. Walter saw her car from across the lot. A white Audi that Brendan had leased for her, parked crooked in a visitor space. She was standing beside it with her arms crossed, wearing sunglasses even though the sky was overcast. She'd been crying. He could tell from 20 yards. He walked toward his truck. She stepped into his path. "Walter?" He stopped. He didn't put his hands in his pockets. He didn't cross his arms. He just stood there, holding his lunchbox, looking at the woman he had loved for 9 years. "Why didn't you tell me?" she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. "All those years, all that time, why didn't you ever tell me?" Walter looked at her for a long moment, not with anger, not with satisfaction, just with the steady, clear eyes of a man who had already asked himself that question and found the answer. "Because I wanted a wife who loved the man," he said. "Not the money. You answered that question for me." Angela's chin trembled. She pulled off her sunglasses. Her eyes were swollen and raw. "Do you still love me?" "I loved who I thought you were," Walter said. "The woman you showed me. That's gone now. Can you forgive me?" He was quiet for a moment. A school bus rumbled past on the street behind them. A kid yelled something from an open window. The world kept turning. "Forgiveness isn't the same as trust, Angela. Maybe someday I can forgive you, but trust." He shook his head slowly. "That's gone. That's been gone." He stepped around her. He opened his truck door. He set his lunchbox on the passenger seat. He drove away. 6 months later, Brendan Fossey's flagship development, the one that needed Riverside, the one his lenders had underwritten based on projected expansion, collapsed under its own debt. He sold the downtown condo. He downsized to a single mid-tier project in a smaller market. He was fine. He was just smaller. 18 months after the conference room meeting, Walter stood at a podium he hadn't wanted, wearing his Carhartt jacket, watching a backhoe break earth on the Riverside district. The joint venture was official. Crossroads Property Group and a black-owned community development firm out of Atlanta, with a binding agreement preserving 40% affordable housing. Local news cameras lined the perimeter. City council members shook hands for photographs. Walter shook hands too. He was not the loudest person there. He never had been. Dottie Cross sat in the front row in a folding chair, wearing her Sunday hat on a Tuesday, pressing a handkerchief to her eyes with the quiet pride of a woman who had raised a patient man and lived long enough to see the patients pay. Israel stood beside Walter and leaned in close. "You know she's going to see this on the news." "Good," Walter said. And that was all. The crowd thinned. The cameras packed up. The council members left in their dark sedans. Israel shook Walter's hand and walked to his car. Dottie kissed her son's cheek and let her sister drive her home. Walter stayed. He stood at the edge of the broken ground in his work jacket, hands in his pockets, looking at the fresh, dark earth where something was about to rise. The late afternoon light came in low and golden across the lot, catching the dust from the backhoe, turning it into something that almost looked like weather. His grandfather had given him one piece of land and one piece of advice. Don't be in a hurry to show people who you are. The right moment always comes. Walter looked at the ground. It always comes. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.